Welcome everyone to today's episode of Goals and Game Changers. We're here to explore key insights on business transformation, leadership, and product innovation. My name is Stacey Louie. I'm CEO of Hyperdrive and your host for today. In today's episode of Goals and Game Changers, we sit down with Dan Olsen, product management expert and author, to explore the secrets behind building great products. From understanding customer needs to refining product market fit, Dan's going to share invaluable insights that can help you create and scale successful products. So let's jump in. Welcome, Dan. Great to have you here on Goals and Game Changers. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks, Stacey. Pleasure to be here.
So you're an icon in the Silicon Valley. I don't know about most people when they think of product, they think of all sorts of people. But for me, your name comes up because I got your great book, the Lean Product Playbook. I'd read it just years ago, and it stuck with me, and I kept flipping through it. And for every chapter, it just got better and better. You have such a great reputation in product. I'm curious, like, tell me a little bit about how you got started in product.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Stacey. I appreciate it. Yeah, I've been doing it. It's funny. This is now 20 years on my own as a product management solo consultant, speaker trainer. So I've been at it for a while. And the way I got into it, I kind of real quick, I had a technical background as a kid. I coded. My parents got me a computer. I was an electrical engineering major. And then after my first job out of college, which was actually designing submarines, I wanted to go to business school. And so I was fortunate to get into Stanford Business School, which is what brought me out here to Silicon Valley, where you and I both live. And while I was at business school trying to figure out what do I want to do after graduation, because I had never worked in the civilian sector before, I learned about this emerging career called product management. And the more I learned about it, the more I'm like, this sounds great because I'm kind of technical, but I'm more of a business person. I can blend technical with business and customers and cross-functional teamwork. And so then I asked people, where's the best place to learn product management? And back then at the time, unanimously, everybody said Intuit is the best place to learn. Back then it was like Intuit had product managers,
Right.
Microsoft had program managers, and Yahoo had, which was coming up with the dot-com boom, had producers. But basically I went to Intuit and that was really the start. 5 years into it, I learned tons. A lot of what's in that book came from Intuit. It's kind of like that book, like everything I needed to know, I learned in kindergarten. It's like everything you need to know about product management, I learned it Intuit. A lot of it is the solid foundation from there.
Well, what an amazing career. So you started out designing submarines. You decided to go to grad school, went to B school over at Stanford, and then somehow you made your way into it to work for one of the best innovators in the valley, Scott Cook, right? And when he was kind of leading the helm at that point.
Yeah, I was lucky that he was still there. In fact, he sat around the corner from me, and so I would get to hear him talk. He would still speak to groups of employees, and Bill Campbell was still around too, coach, right?
Wow.
So it was very interesting. I got to interact with both those. So I'm very grateful for that. And I actually, I credit why Intuit had such a strong product management muscle and culture to Scott Cook because he basically he came from Procter and Gamble, where you have to convince like why should you buy this paper towel instead of this paper towel? Like these are commodity goods, so they really are good at market research and consumer marketing and what's your real unique value prop. You know what I mean? And he applied that to software. He'd also worked at Bain Consulting and was an MBA. So I think he's like the first kind of, well, one of the first modern product managers before that was even a title.
That's amazing. It's amazing. Now, you're having this great experience, having worked with Scott and carving your own at that point. I mean, what's so interesting about product? And I ask this because yeah, I was in product management too, and that's how I cut my teeth. That was my first job out there. I didn't have anything interesting like building submarines as a job, but I was a product manager of all things raisins, Del Monte raisins back in the day. That
Okay,
was the
there
first
you
job.
go. Yeah.
And eventually it got more sophisticated. I ended up working my way through SAP and Oracle and building products for Oracle, and then later on Xerox PARC doing some AI development over there. Um, but for us product managers, we all have like this reason why we get into it and this passion. I'm kind of curious, like, what's so interesting about product that kind of drew you in?
It's interesting because the funny thing is I didn't know what being a product manager was like until I started day one at Intuit. And after being there for a few weeks, I realized this isn't too much different. This isn't too different from what I was doing in the submarine world, to be honest with you. It was just very, very highly technical, like engineering centric product management in the sense that there's a set of requirements that we're trying to achieve for the product, right? For a submarine, it's like, hey, how fast does it have to go? How deep does it have to go? All these kind of capabilities that you can view as like your PRD requirements, right? And then you've got all these cross-functional teams. There's like, there's the pumps team and the valves team and the steam generator team and the reactor team and the materials team. So basically it was like cross-functional teamwork to design a highly technical product. Well, that's basically what software product management is, arguably with fewer disciplines to be involved. It's like, yeah, we got dev, we got design, we got, PM. So that was part of it. But for me, it's really like I like creating things of value. I've always been a tinker. That's why I was an electrical engineering major. I like, if I had more time, I would spend more time making stuff, probably get into robotics, but I got two kids and a busy job, so I don't have time to do that kind of stuff, right? But for me, as I've gotten into product management, the thing that I like is just promoting excellence in product management. Right. I mean, it's basically, we've been fortunate that it's grown a lot in the last 6, 7 years. It's really exploded. And, when I was coming up in product management, there weren't that many resources. There weren't any product conferences. And so I think it's best to share best practices, because the thing is, if I can, like in a workshop, teach 60 product managers how to up level their game, then when they go to make those products, that's going to benefit thousands or millions of people later, right? So if we can elevate the whole product management field, then all the products we use every day are going to get better and better, right? So it kind of benefits society. So I kind of take a geeky economic kind of utility view of it. Like, how can we maximize utility? People got to use these products anyway. How can we maximize utility? How much economic value we're actually creating for people? And that's why I like to share best practices.
Yeah, yeah. I think I love the way you said that. I mean, there's nothing more amazing and nothing more proud in my career, prouder than seeing your product sitting there on a shelf, right? Like back in my raisin days, seeing raisins out on the shelf, and then going into like working at Oracle and being able to represent your product in front of companies like Pepsi. And the thing that I thought was amazing about product was being able to speak in the language of the customer, and
Yes,
that they felt like you
definitely.
understood what they struggled with, and being able to convert their problem in with a real solution that changed their lives, how they worked, how they thought, how they made decisions. And I always thought that was kind of interesting. And is a bit of a transformation for me. I mean, coming into product management, I really didn't think too much about it other than, hey, I just write a bunch of requirements. But it's so much more than that, isn't it?
Right. It definitely is. No, and I think, in the early days, I would describe my job, back in the days of we used to use the term requirements more instead of user stories, right? It's like we're
Yeah.
writing a requirements document. We used to try to describe my job as translating customer needs or customer problems into product requirements or business requirements. That's kind of how V1 job description. Later on, I would evolve it to be like I realized, again, back to this economic view, is like, hey, we've got this team of 15 developers. They can code whatever we want them to code, however many hours. They're going to code what they're going to code. If we give them this set of things to code, it's going to create this kind of a return for customers and for the company. If we give them this other set, right? So I kind of summarize my job as maximizing the ROI on the engineering resources, right? Which kind of takes into account. But to your point, you do have to become like a customer whisperer in a way. Like, you can't just be in your own ivory tower writing your requirements in a vacuum, right? You've got to be able to understand what customers say. And I would go beyond that, even back to this cross-functional thing we're talking about. You got to be able to speak engineering to the engineers and design to the designers, and sales to the salespeople. So it always reminds me of like the United Nations translator people. It's like, you've got to be able. You don't need to be fluent, an expert in their language, but you better understand their terminology and what's important to them. And I think that it begins with customer empathy, but
Yeah.
also stakeholder empathy or function empathy, the ability to understand and say, okay, I'm trying to achieve X. And I need these other folks to help me with that. What's in it for them? Why would they care about this? And so I think that's really important to think about.
Yeah, yeah, definitely, definitely. Now, coming from your background, you're all over the place in the valley. You're up and down the valley. I mean, you host a meeting once a month, this great session, and you get some great speakers. Um, if anybody needs to know anybody in product, I just know you're the person to contact, right? And and having those kinds of connections comes from all the experience you've had in working with companies across the Silicon Valley and beyond. Um, seeing like these companies both coming from like Fortune 100s to these startups that are just trying to get off the ground. I mean, you've seen all these companies, but there seems to be like there's some organizations who still struggle with going from like an
Yes.
older model, the classic business requirements. We've got to get the business requirements set up before we create a in software. It's you get your high level design, and then you go on to your detail level design, then you go on to all the other iterations, the classic waterfall model. But the world's changed, right? When we start thinking about digital transformation and how that changes the world. I mean, can you take us through a little bit of that evolution of change and what companies need to do to be thinking about the old way of working to something that's going to be a much more effective in the 21st century?
Yeah, definitely. And it's interesting because I have, I didn't cover it, but for those 20 years that I mentioned, I've consulted to a lot of companies at different stages, different industries. So I've seen the transformation that's going on. And to your point, there are companies, in 2025 who are just now starting to transform. So it's kind of interesting. It's kind of interesting. There's like certain industries are leaders in the digital adoption of that, and some are more laggards. And so it's interesting because like on any given year, it's like all of a sudden, like all the ed tech companies will be calling me to have me come train their product teams. And then the next year, it's all the fintech companies. So you kind of tell which industries are going through the transformation. And obviously, if your competitors are going through the transformation, you probably should be too to keep up with them, right? Because at the end of the day, a lot of this has to do with speed of execution and speed of innovation, right? So one of the foundational things is it was obviously something you're very familiar with is agile transformation. If you're developing things in a waterfall way versus an agile way, luckily I think most people have gotten that memo in 2025. So usually when they call me in, it's like post agile transformation, and they realize, okay, it's not perfect, but we switched from waterfall to agile. We still, it's, as I always like to say, it's a journey. Everything's a journey. All these evolutions and transformations are a journey. We just want to be better tomorrow than we were today, right? And so then they suddenly realize, okay, well, we've got the teams cranking out, product every 2 weeks, but how do we know what we're asking them to build is actually going to create customer value? And so they kind of realize that, and then they realize, oh, we need to transform our product org. And a
Mhm.
lot of these clients, as I like to say, they were wildly successful before the internet existed. Like these are my clients, like Nike.
Yeah.
Nike was crushing it before the internet was around, right?
Yes.
Or Walmart. Walmart was doing great with their brick and mortar stores, or Taco Bell, right? I went to Taco Bell as a kid. I love it. These are my clients, right? So, but the reality is now they have digital products and presences. They have websites, they have mobile apps. They got to think about that. They've got supply chains for delivery. Everyone's trying to compete with Amazon. They're like, now it's like, hey, get it same day. I'm like, are you serious, right? So it's just the bar is always rising on the competitive front, and so it's kind of like either transform or you're going to get left behind, right? So I think one thing is, basically people expecting and understanding this model of this cross-functional teamwork. Like, actually the logo for the Lean Product Meetup that you mentioned, it's like a Venn diagram that's pretty popular that has like product management in one circle, engineering in another circle, and like design or UX in the third circle. Not a lot of those companies are making the transformation. They're not practicing that tight cross-functional collaboration, and the people aren't used to working that way. They're used to working more in silos, and like you said, PRD figures out the requirements, throws it over the wall to design designs it in a vacuum, throws it over the wall to dev. Like that doesn't work, right? That's not going to create the outcomes that you need to succeed in today's competitive world. So that's basically part of it. The other thing that's really important is the distinction between discovery and delivery at a high level. Like I actually have a framework before my book came out of like discovery, definition, design, and development that I call the 4Ds. But if we simplify and just say discovery versus delivery, most companies, most engineers, designers, and even PMs spend over 90% of their time on delivery. Okay, let's get the stories ready for the next sprint. Okay, let's refine the backlog. Okay, let's estimate story points. Okay, let's work on them. Let's update Jira. Let's code them. Let's test them. Let's launch them. And you're on that 2 week hamster wheel, and you're basically spending all your time in discovery. No one, the PM is so busy, they don't have time to actually go and talk to customers to
Right.
kind of figure out what the real customer problems are, how to prioritize things, right? At the end of the day, prioritization becomes key. And a lot of those companies that in the old model, it's like the stakeholders are the ones making the priority calls, right? Like, oh, I just know I'm an expert. I know but it's like you
Yeah.
really want to be listening to the
It's the hippo
customers.
effect, right? Where they
Yeah.
call it yeah, highest paid
Yeah.
person in the room, right?
Totally, right? And so so a lot of that's the challenge, and that's the challenge is if you want to transition from a tops down hierarchical leaders make the decision to more empowered teams, you can't just flip the switch like that because you're not going to achieve the outcomes you want. And so it's a tough thing to do to kind of you need to like have clearer outcomes and clearer goals and more communication and train your team and express cross-functional collaboration and kind of get there on a quarter by quarter basis. I think a quarter cadence is a good way to try to make progress on this. Um, so yeah, and we'll talk about that with this example, how to pilot this change and how to make it happen across a large org.
Yeah, how to steer through. Um, I'm curious of all the companies out there, and I'm asking you if you could take a step back and imagine, do you have like a team or a company that just stands out to you that did a transformation or did something different in terms of product and just starting out?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I've been fortunate to work with a lot of companies going through transformation at different stages and things. The one that stands out the most was actually one of my clients' financial engines. So
Mm,
they had been around. So they started out as a startup, but they had been around and they had IPO'd. They'd actually been around for 17 years. And so this is a very common case where a company was a high flying startup. They were innovative. They were great. And then eventually over time everything like there's a product life cycle. It's like a company life cycle. They were starting to slow down. And the cool thing about this was they still had their founding CEO. Actually, founder mode is a really hot topic in the last few months, right? So they had a founding CEO and he himself noticed, he's like, you know what? Like, our company is just not innovating like it used to. And we
mm,
are not, the pace of our development has slowed down significantly. Because he had been there the whole time, he could kind of observe that comparison. And so he was honest. He looked himself in the mirror and said, I don't want, this is not how I want our company to be. And they had recently adopted agile development. And then he hired me basically to help transform his org and up level their product skills and practices. And so that was a great experience with there were like 10 teams, 10 scrum teams. And I started out with like a training workshop to get everybody on the same page. There's a lot of advantage. That's the funny thing about Agile. It's like, oh, you did Agile at your last company. Okay, let's do Agile. I guarantee the way that they did it at those companies were not the same, right? There's no other, it's so funny. Like the Golden State Warriors don't just show up at the court and go, hey, let's play some basketball. Like they know their positions, they know their plays, they practice. But in the business world, we just throw a bunch of people in and say, go do Scrum, go do product development, right? Like no talk about roles, no talk about process, right? So the number one thing of that kind of initial training workshop is just level setting. Everybody has the same vocabulary. Everybody understands what's going on. And then, I worked with those teams. And the cool thing there is we kind of set up with actually the CEOs involved. We set up, and I think this is key, bi-weekly review meetings where the teams would come in and present to the CEO, me, the head of product engineering and design. So you had really hands-on leadership. It wasn't just, okay, we're doing this, and then there's no oversight from leadership. So they could coach. The point of those weekly meetings were, as a team came in and presented their hypotheses and their tests and the progress and the metrics they saw, there was live coaching opportunities and a way to stay in touch with those teams in a scalable way. And so it was a really cool example, and we could talk more about it. But yeah, that's kind of the situation that was involved with.
wow. It's something like that. It seems like it's a considerable undertaking. Now, I could imagine people would assume, oh, it's easy because the CEO came in and said, hey, this is what we're going to do. Is it really that easy?
It's not, it's not. And it was this specific transformation project that I worked on that I kind of created a simple high level framework that like just because the CEO says something doesn't mean everybody suddenly you magically have the skills you need to succeed in your job or that you have the right mindset or motivation. And so I ended up creating this in my mind, like this two-dimensional thing to assess everybody, like literally all the 100 plus people on these 10 teams. Each person I'd be like, okay, where are they on the skill dimension, low, medium, high, for the skills they need to succeed, and where are they on the motivation to change or get better dimension.
Oh, interesting.
You know what I mean? Because it's like when you're doing change management, you can't just look at skills. You got to look at, are they on board? Are they not? Because I've seen a lot of places where it's like, okay, this is the leadership fad of the quarter. This too shall pass. Let me just kind of,
Right.
I'll yes, then I'll smile and say, yeah, yeah, we're doing Six Sigma. Cool. Yeah. All right, cool. And then a month, 6 months later, it'll be the next, there'll be a new manager. So if you've got rotating leadership, the people below it just like, it's like, I'm just going to duck and cover and, whatever, but so that's the thing about the motivation. And so you end up with like simplistically two quadrants, right? Like high skill, high motivation. Those are your rock star. You're not going to have a lot of them, right? But there's going to be some of them. And those are the people you want to look to and put in key leadership roles so they can help drive the transformation. You've got high skill but low motivation. On
Mm.
the one hand, it's good because they have high skill, but if they have low motivation to improve or change, they're actually problematic. It's because they're going to be like the naysayers, the ones that are like, why are we doing this? And, I've actually would rather take someone with lower skill and higher motivation and try to train them and coach them because at least you've got the raw material that they want to do better. And then finally, obviously, low skill, low motivation, you want to consider replacing them. And even though I've described it as binary, it's really like bell curves. There's bell curve distributions for these, right? And so
Mm.
what we did, one trick that we did is natural bell curve distributions across the 10 teams is to help kind of set this up for success is we created a special pilot team. All 10 teams were going through the change. Actually, we were trying to do it for everybody, but there was one team where we kind of made sure that most of the people, we couldn't do it with everybody, but most of the people on that team were high skill, high motivation, or at least high motivation on that team. And I worked closely with them. And that's the team that we gave the most ambitious goal. And their job was to literally create a new product, innovate a new product, which the company had not done in years, right? They were just organically growing their product and growing their revenue, incremental innovation, but no true like blue ocean product innovation. And so we gave this team that goal and they actually were able to do it. It was pretty cool. They were able to do it, create a whole new unique product. They got a lot of press. And then what you do, which is key, is then you take that example and you put it up on a pedestal and you show it to all the other penguins and say, look what these guys did doing the new project. Why don't you guys jump off the iceberg and try the new way also, right? To kind of prove that it has traction.
Yeah, so being able to run that pilot and demonstrate that there's success built into that. But given what you're saying, I could imagine having that kind of attention from executives and feeling like executives are supporting the idea and not just talking the talk from the ivory tower. Must have meant a lot to the.
Yeah, I think, and that's the thing is it's interesting because I'm implementing this in another client right now. And for a few months, we've been doing all the things. We did the training workshop. Everyone's saying all the right things, but we do not have that biweekly review meeting in place. And I
Hmm.
will say it's taking longer for traction to get in. And I think so. I think it's just a great way to really make sure that it's getting reinforced. Because when you're doing change management, you've got the leadership has to reinforce those messages again and again. And I teach workshops. I try to make it as realistic as possible with case studies and things like that. But it's very different when you're actually working on something and you've got to make decisions now. Say, okay, cool. We have this new way of working. And now I'm actually doing the requirements for this or the design for this or the testing for this. What calls do I make? That's where those real-time coaching meetings with the leadership can be helpful to get the right perspective.
Fantastic. Now, key takeaways. Your key takeaways from your experience in digital transformation and making things kind of happen. What would you say that looks like?
I think, and just to be clear on the outcomes, that pilot team then led to other teams doing it. And that company 3 years later got acquired for like $3 billion. So it did unlock all this new innovation that they were able to do, which was pretty cool. So key takeaways is, change management is hard. It's always hard. It's always hard. It requires repetition and constant reinforcement. You've got to provide training. You've got to provide coaching and you need to keep reinforcing that new mindset and principles with recurring leadership oversight. So setting up that meeting, that review process, whatever the right cadence is critical to really, it kind of also conveys leadership commitment if they're taking time to do this. The other thing is, as I was saying, is, as you're looking to do this digital transformation, assessing each individual on where are they on the skill dimension and the motivation dimension and figuring out, what do you want to do with people that are, low motivation, um, and low skill people. You got to think about team composition is really important there as well. I do think in general most people do change management would say a pilot approach is a great way to kind of get the flywheel going, and then you use that team success to spread and accelerate the adoption by the other teams.
Thank you, Dan. We started this podcast talking about the people that you're connected with. I mean, you are so connected with so many thought leaders in industry and so many founders and executives of these Fortune 100 behemoths. Um, Looking at the people that you've known in your past, we call this we do call the section player of the week. Is there like a player, someone significant that you've seen start dropping ideas or concepts that you would just say, hey, this person's just someone special?
Yeah. I think there are a lot of special leaders. Like that's the people that hire me. Because if you think about it, and my clients, someone's got to have the bravery to say, I think we need to do change management. I think we really need to majorly change how we're doing our work. Sometimes it's the CEO, sometimes it's the GM, sometimes it's the head of product advocating within an org. So there are a lot of people, usually the people that are the ones that initially reach out to me to do these digital transformation engagements. Um, but just real quick, other clients that I've helped out with is Medallia. They're a B2B software, right? It was awesome to help them. They IPO'd for, again, 2.6 billion. And I've done
Mm.
it for One Medical Group and Box back in the day. So it's really fun when you get to do it. So I could pick out one of those examples, but the one I would pick out is Marty Kagan, because he's actually wrote a book a year ago called Transformed that is all about digital transformation. And so I think that for a lot of companies, trying to go through this, it's been a good resource for them, right? And and you mentioned the meetup. Marty spoke, and he just spoke there a couple months ago. He's spoken there 9 times. We launched his book Transform there last year. You can check out videos of his talks there. But and then the interesting thing, I think a lot of he also has Inspired and Empowered. His books are really good at sharing the principles and how to think about things. And then a lot of people like my book as a compliment for like, how do we actually do it? That's why it's called a playbook. So I think, there are luckily compared to when I started in product management, there's no shortage of resources out there now as far as books and videos. I do I try to really host top speakers at my meetup. And so we video all their talks, and they're on my YouTube channel, which is just youtube.com/Dan Olsen. We have over 190 videos. I've been doing that meetup for over 11 years now, every month. So we have a lot of videos, one of the top product channels out there you can check out from all the speakers. Also, Jeffrey Moore, Crossing the Chasm, is in there. There's a lot of great speakers that you would expect in there.
Yeah, yeah. Your library of speakers is just untouchable. I'm the people that you've had come in and speak with your audience is tremendous. The lessons that you've learned, I've been to your events. It's phenomenal. And there's not an event you go to that you're just not blown away. I just where you leave thinking on the drive home how impactful this is to not just to see someone who's so successful or has written a book, but how it's actually applying to your business in my case, or the product that you're building, or just the people that you're working with. There's so much great content on your channel, and I have to compliment you on that. um so
Thanks.
after today's podcast, if there's a few things that you just want to point out, that like your key message, so what stands out as being the most important things that you've learned in your career?
Yeah, I mean, that we kind of touched on this at the beginning. The tech world's evolving, the bar is constantly being raised higher. The main thing is there are best practices out there. We didn't go down that rabbit hole of like, why in 2025 are there still people doing it this old way that we know is not the right way? That's a whole other topic. Um, but I think you just, as a leader, you need to be honest with yourself about how strong your product team skills actually and practices are.
Yeah.
And your outcomes can decide that. If you're like, hey, we're gonna do this big park launch and we're gonna sell 50, million in revenue in the next 6 months, and then you launch it and you make like 3 million in revenue, you gotta look at yourself in the mirror and be honest and be like, okay, something's not working. And if you do that a few times, usually by the time someone calls me, they've tried it a few times and they're honest. And I always like to say, do you want to live in reality or do you want to live, not in reality? If you don't, people that don't want to live in reality don't call me because they just play the blame game or something, right? So you just gotta be honest and obviously along those lines, like AI is totally disrupting things, right? So that's, we've been fortunate to live through a lot of these like kind of paradigm shifts, the internet, mobile, right?
That's
And now AI. It's like, so you got to be adapting. Like the pace of change has never been faster. And so you have to change. Change management is hard. It always takes a lot of work, but you can, by following some of the advice that I mentioned here today, and by some of the people that I mentioned, you can improve your team skills and ways of working, and make progress for sure.
yeah.
I've seen lots of teams do that. And Financial Engines basically is a story of a company that, after operating for 17 years, reinvented itself by adopting these ways of working, instead of just going down the maturity curve, and trying to eke out revenue and things like that. So it's possible and it's doable.
Absolutely. Product management, I would say, is definitely at the heart of things, and it's your direct access point to that customer. So getting that voice of the customer and ultimately getting product market fit and having a great business. So thank you, Dan, for joining us. Great to have you here, and I appreciate all the things that you're doing and all the great things that you're going to be doing in the future. Great job.
Great. Thanks a lot, Stacey. It was fun talking with you today. I appreciate it.
Well, that's a wrap for this episode of Goals and Game Changers. A huge thank you to Dan Olsen for sharing his expertise on building and refining great products. If you enjoyed this conversation, please subscribe and stay tuned for more insights from industry leaders. Keep following us on social media and check us out at hyperdriveagile.com. Thank you all for joining us today, and stay curious, stay customer focused. We'll see you next time.